He was the last man anyone would have picked for legend. Leo Major, a French-Canadian kid from the working-class streets of Montreal, was defined by a quiet, simmering stubbornness long before he ever saw a battlefield. In 1940, he watched the newsreels of a Europe crumbling under Nazi boots and made a simple, unemotional decision. He would go. There was no grand patriotism in his voice, no thirst for glory, just a firm, unshakable belief that some things needed to be stood up to. The Army, with its love for order and obedience, immediately sensed a problem. Leo was a natural rifleman, tough and resilient, but officers found him difficult, even insolent. He followed the spirit of a mission, not the letter of its rules. He argued, questioned, and operated with a frustrating independence that made him a sergeant's nightmare in peacetime. Yet, from the moment his unit, the Regiment de la Chaudière, hit the bloody shores of Normandy on D-Day, a terrifying alchemy occurred. Under the storm of steel, where others were paralyzed by fear, Leo's rebellious energy found its true medium. The chaos that broke ordinary men focused him. His defiance turned outward, toward the enemy, and in that crucible he became something far more dangerous than a poor soldier. He became a fearless one. That fearlessness was a currency he spent freely. In the grinding attrition of the Normandy campaign and the push through the Scheldt, he fought with a calm, predatory efficiency that both awed and unsettled his comrades. He moved like a shadow, listened more than he spoke, and possessed an uncanny talent for survival in landscapes of death. But fate has a way of balancing such audacity. In a ferocious close-quarters battle in the autumn of 1944, a German phosphorus grenade exploded near his position. The searing chemical fire claimed his left eye. Blinded, in agony, he still refused to be evacuated until the position was secure. The Army, looking at the bandaged, half-blinded soldier, had a standard script: a medical discharge, a ticket home, a pension. They presented him with the paperwork. Leo Major, sitting on his hospital cot, tore it up. To send him home was an insult he would not accept. He hadn't come this far to quit. Through sheer, bull-headed will, he badgered and convinced his superiors to let him stay. They finally relented, issuing him an eye patch and a warning. What they didn't realize was that they weren't sending a broken man back to the front. They were unleashing a force of singular, focused vengeance, a man with nothing left to lose except the war itself, and he was now going to fight it entirely on his own terms. Returning to the front with one eye was an exercise in relentless disorientation. The world Leo Major once navigated with instinctual ease had become a flat, treacherous canvas. Depth perception was a stolen luxury. Judging distances was now a calculated gamble. The constant, dull ache behind the eye patch was a permanent companion, a reminder of the vulnerability he refused to acknowledge. Yet Leo did not merely cope, he engineered a new method of war. He learned to aim by the alignment of his body and the feel of the stock, turning his rifle into an extension of his singular vision. He moved by sound, his hearing sharpened to an animal's acuity, parsing the rustle of a uniform from the sigh of the wind. Where sight failed, experience and hyper-awareness took over. To his comrades in the Régiment de la Chaudière, he became a figure of awe and silent unease. In the chaotic hell of a firefight, where men screamed and prayers were shouted, Leo was a pool of chilling calm. He spoke in terse, necessary commands, his silence in the midst of bedlam more unnerving than any battle cry. The war had not broken him. It had stripped away everything non-essential, forging a soldier of terrifying simplicity and focus. His very presence was a paradox, a wounded man who had become more lethal, a disabled soldier whose capacity for action seemed enhanced by his loss. His commanders, recognizing that such a unique weapon could not be used in conventional ranks, assigned him to the most perilous duty,
forward scout and lone raider. It was a role that perfectly suited his new instincts. Unburdened by the need to coordinate with another's sightline, he became a ghost in the twilight zones between Allied and German lines. He would slip away for days at a time, mapping machine gun nests, counting troop transports, and sometimes indulging in his own brand of psychological warfare. He began taking prisoners not through ambush, but through audacity. On one frozen night, he silently infiltrated a German trench line, waking sleeping soldiers one by one with the whisper and the cold barrel of his Sten gun pressed to their lips. He marched them back, a bewildered line of enemies, delivered to his baffled superiors like a hunter presenting game. Each successful, irrational mission deepened the legend and the concern. He was accumulating a score that the war itself seemed to demand, but his fellow soldiers whispered a sober truth. A man who courted death this intimately, who had already paid a partial price, might be seeking to settle the entire debt in one final, unimaginable act. They feared not that he would break, but that he would succeed in finding an end worthy of his rage.
By April 1945, the war in Europe had the desperate, grinding rhythm of a final act. The Canadian First Army, having fought through the bitter winter, pushed north through the Netherlands, liberating towns amid the flooded polders. Their next objective was the ancient city of Zwolle, a key transportation hub straddling the Overijssel Canal. Intelligence painted a grim picture. A determined garrison of German troops, a mix of Wehrmacht regulars and SS fanatics, had fortified the city. Bridges were wired with explosives, sniper nests were carved into medieval bell towers, and the streets were prepared for a brutal block-by-block defense. The order from high command was a direct assault at dawn, a hammer blow expected to shatter the city and cost hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Canadian and civilian lives. The commanders of the Régiment de la Chaudière studied their maps under the dim light of a field tent, their faces heavy with the anticipation of necessary slaughter. They needed eyes inside the city, a final reconnaissance to pinpoint strongholds and artillery positions before the hell of sunrise. It was a mission with a slim chance of return, a task for ghosts. When the call for volunteers went out, Leo Major stepped forward without a word. His motive was not bravery in the abstract, but a specific, smoldering calculation. He had seen enough towns reduced to rubble, enough young men fed into the meat grinder of frontal assaults. The memory of his dead eye and the constant phantom pain fueled a cold, practical fury. He proposed a simple plan. He and a fellow scout, Corporal Willie Arsenault, would slip into Zwolle under cover of darkness. They would move like shadows, map the enemy's heart, and be back before first light to guide the killing blow. It was a textbook reconnaissance, a whisper in the dark. Command approved, seeing in Major the perfect, unflinching instrument for the job. As they blackened their faces and checked their gear, Sten guns, grenades, a map folded tightly against the chest, Arsenault, a reliable and steady soldier, followed the quiet man with the eye patch. They both knew the statistics of such patrols, but as they melted into the inky darkness beyond the Allied lines, the damp Dutch earth muffling their steps, Leo carried a secondary, unspoken thought. The textbook had failed them all too often. If the opportunity presented itself, he would write his own manual. The city's dark silhouette, pierced by the occasional flare, loomed ahead. 2 men against a garrison. One of them would not see the morning. The silence of the Dutch countryside dissolved into the tense, watchful stillness of occupied territory as Leo Major and Corporal Arsenault crossed the final fields and slipped into the outer precincts of Zwolle. The city was a tomb of shadows, its medieval facades looming black against a star-flecked sky, punctuated only by the faint, distant glow of a German guard post or the sudden skeletal silhouette of a bicycle patrol. They moved as they had been trained, a two-man symphony of muted steps and hand signals, flowing from doorway to alley, their senses stretched to a wire's tension. The mission was clear: observe, note, and return. For an hour they were ghosts, mapping machine gun emplacements at key intersections, noting the ominous cable-strewn bulk of the bridges over the canal. The weight of the impending dawn assault hung over every observation. Each fortified position they logged meant more Canadian lives at stake. Then, near the city's central square, fate intervened with brutal suddenness. A lone German sentry emerging from a doorway for a cigarette stumbled directly into their path. In the heart-stopping second of mutual recognition, Arsenault reacted first, raising his weapon. But from a deeper shadow, the staccato roar of an MG-42 machine gun erupted, its lethal fire hose of tracer rounds stitching across the cobblestones. Corporal Willie Arsenault was cut down instantly. The mission, in its purest form, had ended in catastrophic failure. Leo hit the ground, the echo of the gunfire pounding against the city's ancient walls. Grief was a luxury the night did not afford. It was instantly consumed by a cold, volcanic rage. Crawling to his friend's still form, he confirmed the worst. The rational order to withdraw, to carry back the vital intelligence they had gathered, flashed through his mind and was just as swiftly discarded. Retreat now meant Arsenault's death was merely a footnote in a report preceding a bloody battle. Lying there in the filth of the street, with German shouts now rallying in the darkness, Leo Major's mind performed a staggering, illogical calculus. The rules of reconnaissance were dead with his friend. A new, audacious plan, born of equal parts fury, tactical insanity, and a profound understanding of the enemy's psyche in those collapsing days of the war, seized him. If a two-man scout team could be detected, he reasoned, then a large, aggressive raiding force would be expected. And if the Germans believed a full Canadian battalion was already inside their city, chaos would reign. Their doctrine would demand a fighting withdrawal to consolidate, or better yet, a full retreat to avoid being cut off. Alone, bleeding from scrapes, but whole in his purpose, Leo Major made his decision. He would not bring back a map, he would bring back the city itself. Slinging his Sten gun, he vanished into a side alley, not as a fugitive, but as a phantom army of one. The first act of his deception was a grenade, its sharp crack and bloom of flame hurled towards a parked German truck. The night, once silent, now belonged to him.
What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare and sheer, terrifying audacity. Transforming himself from scout to specter, Leo Major became a one-man army of chaos. He abandoned all stealth, embracing noise, confusion, and the paralyzing power of uncertainty. His strategy was simple, yet brilliant. Never strike twice from the same place and make each attack suggest a different, larger unit. He would sprint down a narrow alley, fire a full magazine from his Sten gun at a German jeep, the sharp rat-tat-tat echoing off the brick walls. Before the stunned soldiers could pinpoint the source, he'd already vanished, circling 2 blocks to emerge near a commandeered hotel housing officers. There, he would heave a grenade through a ground-floor window, the subsequent explosion showering the street with glass and masonry. As shouts of alarm rose and German boots pounded toward the blast, he'd be 3 streets over, using his rifle now to snipe at the sentry lights of a suspected barracks, the slower, authoritative crack of the Enfield suggesting a different kind of marksman. He commandeered weapons from the dead, using a captured German machine pistol to unleash a furious burst at a radio truck, its antennae toppling like a felled tree, severing communications. To the German defenders, now fully roused from their billets, the reports flooding their confused command posts were incomprehensible. Simultaneous, coordinated attacks from the North Gate, the Eastern Canal, and the city center. It was impossible. Yet the evidence, the gunfire, the explosions, the screams in the dark, was irrefutable. A Canadian airborne battalion, they began to believe, must have dropped silently inside their perimeter. Leo amplified the illusion with brazen personal confrontations. He moved through the back gardens and cellars of Zwolle's civilians, sometimes mere feet from searching patrols. On several occasions, he materialized from the shadows to ambush small, disoriented groups of Germans. Instead of killing them, he would disarm them, bark orders in a mix of broken German and forceful French, and declare they were now prisoners of a vast encircling force. He would march them to the city's main gate, order them to run towards their own lines, and then melt away. These demoralized, weaponless men became his unwitting agents, spreading panic and confirming the catastrophic news: the Canadians are everywhere inside the city. He even captured the driver of a German staff car at gunpoint, forced him to drive through several intersections while Leo fired from the moving vehicle, then abandoned the car in a central square, a perfect symbol of lost control. For the German commander, the tactical picture collapsed into nightmare. With communications spotty and reports suggesting overwhelming forces in the city's heart, holding the defensive perimeter became suicidal. The fear of being trapped and annihilated, a staple of the Wehrmacht's retreat in those final weeks, took hold. Just before dawn, the order was given, a full tactical withdrawal to the north to avoid encirclement. Tanks, half-tracks, and troops began to stream out of Zwolle, abandoning supplies and fortified positions, fleeing a battalion that existed only in the furious, calculating mind of a one-eyed French Canadian who was, at that very moment, catching his breath in the bell tower of a church, watching his impossible plan unfold.
As the pre-dawn gray began to bleed into the sky, Leo Major observed the fruits of his chaos from a shell-pocked second-story window. The German retreat was becoming a flood, vehicles and troops streaming northward out of Zwolle, a tide of fear he had conjured from nothing. But his soldier's mind, coldly analytical even after hours of superhuman exertion, fixed on a single unresolved point: the main bridge over the Overijssel Canal, the city's vital artery. In every German defensive playbook, a retreating force blew the bridges. It was doctrine. It was the final, spiteful act to slow the pursuer. The intelligence briefings had confirmed it. He had seen the wires himself during his initial reconnaissance. If that bridge fell, the liberating Canadian armor would be stuck on the southern bank. The city would be strategically isolated, and the Germans could regroup and shell Zwolle into ashes from the northern plains. His entire night's work, the salvation of the city and the sparing of thousands of lives, would be rendered meaningless by a single catastrophic explosion. He had not come this far, and Arsenault had not died for a Pyrrhic victory. Pushing his aching body into motion once more, Leo Major began to run not away from the enemy, but toward the most heavily defended and doomed point in the entire city, the bridge's southern approach. What he found was a scene of deliberate finality. A small, determined rearguard squad of German engineers, likely SS, had remained behind to execute the final order. The bridge was a spiderweb of detonation cords and bundled explosive charges lashed to its stone supports. The lead engineer was at the plunger of a manual detonator, its cable snaking across the cobblestones, his head swiveling between his watch and the retreating tail of his column. There was no time for stealth, for clever ruses. This was pure, violent confrontation.
Leo burst from his cover, his Sten gun roaring, not at the man at the plunger, a split-second move that could cause a reflexive, fatal push, but at the soldiers guarding him. Catching them by surprise, he cut down 2 before they could raise their rifles. In the chaotic seconds of shouting and confusion, the engineer ducked for cover, abandoning the immediate detonation. What followed was a lethal, close-range game of cat and mouse across the bridge's entrance. Bullets sparked off ironwork and chipped the ancient stone. Leo, using the thick cement balustrades for cover, worked his way forward, grenade by grenade, burst by burst. He wasn't just fighting men, he was fighting time itself. Finally, with the rear guard neutralized, he reached the grim apparatus. With fingers that refused to tremble, he severed the main cable with his knife. Then, methodically, he began pulling the primed explosive bundles from the bridge's piers and hurling them into the canal below, where they sank harmlessly into the dark water. Each bundle he removed was a city block saved, a life preserved. As the first true light of dawn touched the bridge's deck, it stood intact and silent. The road into Zwolle was open. The city's heart and its future would not be strangled.
A fragile, disbelieving silence settled over Zwolle with the rising sun. The cacophony of the night, the gunfire, the shouts, the roaring engines of retreat had bled away into a quiet so profound it was itself alarming. Behind shuttered windows and in dank cellars, the citizens huddled, waiting for the inevitable crescendo of the promised dawn assault. They braced for the sound of shells tearing into their homes, for the rattle of machine guns in the streets, for the final brutal battle for their city. But no order to attack came. Only an eerie, unsettling calm. The bravest among them, peering through cracks in their curtains, saw empty streets where German checkpoints had stood. They saw abandoned equipment, but no soldiers. An old baker, risking everything, slowly pushed open his shop door. The air was clean, sharp with the smell of dew and spent gunpowder, but absent was the familiar oppressive scent of occupation. His cry, tentative at first, then bursting with incredulous joy, broke the spell. "They're gone! The Germans are gone!" One by one, doors opened. Families, pale and trembling from a night of terror, emerged into the light, not to a landscape of ruin, but to the impossible, breathtaking vista of their own free city, intact and quiet. They touched the cobblestones, the walls, as if to verify the reality. The bridges still stood. Their homes were unshattered. The terror had simply vanished in the night, leaving behind a vacuum of shock that was rapidly filling with a swelling, tearful euphoria. At the city's southern entrance, where the crucial bridge met the road, the first Canadian reconnaissance vehicles, advancing with extreme caution behind a creeping artillery barrage that never materialized, found not a hail of enemy fire, but a scene of surreal peace. Then they saw him. Perched on the parapet of the bridge he had saved, a lone, exhausted figure sat smoking a cigarette, his uniform smudged with soot and grime, a single eye patch giving him the look of a weary pirate. It was Leo Major. He raised a slow hand in greeting as the lead jeep rolled to a halt, its commander staring in utter bewilderment. Before any military questions could be asked, the people of Zwolle provided the answer. A growing crowd of civilians, seeing the Canadian uniforms, surged toward the bridge, not with fear, but with an outpouring of gratitude that turned into a spontaneous festival of liberation. They brought flowers, they wept, they hugged the stunned soldiers, and repeatedly, through translators and gestures, they pointed to the quiet man on the bridge. "He did it," an elderly man insisted, gripping a Canadian officer's sleeve. "The one-eyed soldier. He chased them all away." The story, fractured and unbelievable, began to coalesce. No assault had been needed. The garrison of over 1,500 German soldiers had fled, convinced they were being overrun by a massive force. The ammunition dumps were intact, the strategic bridges secure, the city spared utterly. As the truth dawned on the advancing troops that this solitary, stubborn scout had achieved alone what an entire battalion was prepared to die for, their initial confusion melted into a wave of awe. Leo Major, surrounded by celebrating Dutch families and his own disbelieving comrades, merely finished his cigarette. He had completed his reconnaissance mission. He had, against all logic and orders, simply brought back the entire city.
The army, faced with the undeniable, miraculous result, did what armies do. It moved to confer honor according to its own strict protocols. Leo Major was summoned before his commanding officers. The recommendation was for the highest Commonwealth Award for bravery, the Victoria Cross. Here, the legend of the stubborn soldier from Montreal collided once more with the institution. Leo was informed that for such a prestigious award to be granted, he must accept a mandatory medical discharge and return home a decorated hero. He listened, his single eye fixed on the officer, and refused. The offer felt not like an honor but a betrayal, a bribe to remove him from the fight. His war was not over. His comrades were still advancing into Germany, and he would not be pensioned off like a museum piece while they fought. He was offered the slightly lesser, yet still extraordinary, Distinguished Conduct Medal. Again, he initially refused. Medals, in his view, were for the dead, for those who had paid the ultimate price, not for men who had simply done their job and survived. He had not liberated Zwolle for a piece of ribbon. He had done it to save the lives of the men in his regiment and the people in the city. Under immense pressure, and perhaps understanding that his refusal was causing a different kind of complication, he eventually, reluctantly, accepted the DCM. But it was an artifact that would spend more time in a drawer than on his chest. His true reward came days later when he rejoined his unit at the front, the nods of his comrades, a silence filled with understanding deeper than any citation, worth more than any medal from a general. Leo Major did finish the war, fighting on until the final surrender in Germany. He returned to Montreal, married, raised a family, and worked a quiet life in construction and as a pipe fitter. His legendary past a private matter, never a story offered for praise. But across the ocean, in the streets of Zwolle, his name was becoming a foundational myth of their rebirth. They had not forgotten the one-eyed liberator. For decades they invited him back, and eventually he went. What he found was not a military tribute, but a profound human gratitude. They named his street after him, Leo Major Lawn. Schoolchildren learned his story. Old men who had been boys in those cellars would embrace him, tears in their eyes, thanking him for their lives, their city, their future. In 2005, on the 50th anniversary of liberation, the city presented him with a specially struck medal. This one, from the people, he accepted with pride and wore openly. It represented a truth he could understand, not an institutional award for bravery, but a token of thanks from free people. Leo Major passed away in 2008, a humble man who never claimed the title of hero. History, however, renders its own verdict. He stands as a permanent testament to the unimaginable impact of one resolute individual. A man who, through a combination of sheer nerve, tactical genius, and a deep, unyielding love for his fellow man, both soldier and civilian, turned a reconnaissance mission into an act of salvation, and proved that a single determined will can, against all odds, change the course of history.